Coming to our last question for the day, this listener writes from Salem, Oregon, and asks, could you please explain the biblical perspective on cremation?
This matter of cremation is a very pertinent and relevant one today, as more and more turning to it because of the price and also because of the lack of real estate to bury people on. Our radio was given a certain number of lots in a cemetery here, and I tell you, they went like hotcakes, people wanting to buy them. So that has brought up today the question of cremation. Now, there is no scripture that says you're not to cremate. There's no scripture on that at all. It is known at that time that the followers of Baal, the bodies were burned. Several pagan religions in that area used that method, and it was a very popular method in the Roman Empire. But God's people were obviously told not to do that because of the way that the scriptures been given. You take one, for instance, in 1 Corinthians, he's talking about the dead, and he speaks of the order of it. I didn't intend to read this, but I think I shall. It says here, verse 35 of 1 Corinthians 15. I'll begin reading there. But some man will say, how are the dead raised up, and with what body do they come? Thou fool, that which thou sowest is not quickened, except it die. And that which thou sowest not that body that shall be, but bare grain, it may chance of wheat or of some other grain. But God giveth it a body as it hath pleased him, and to every seed his own body. All flesh is not the same flesh. There is one kind of flesh of man, another flesh of beast, another fishes, another birds. There are also celestial bodies, bodies terrestrial. But the glory of the celestial is one, the glory of the terrestrial is another. There is one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, and another glory of the stars. For the star differeth from another star in glory. So also is the resurrection of the dead. It is sown in corruption, it's raised in incorruption. It is sown in dishonor. It's raised in glory. It is sown in weakness and raised in power. It is sown a natural body. It's raised a spiritual body. There is a natural body. There's a spiritual body. Now you can see what Paul is doing there. He's likening the burial of a Christian to sowing seed in the ground. And when you sow seed in the ground, you expect the seed to come up. That's the intention of sowing seed, is that the seed will come up. And the farmer doesn't burn his seed and expect to have a crop. He has to sow it in the ground by faith. By the way, that's the way that he operates, that by faith, if it's sown corn, the corn's going to come up. And if it's sowing wheat, wheat's going to come up. If he sows cotton, cotton's going to come up. That is the way you sow the body. Now, it's a testimony of a Christian to bury your dead. Why? Because you're expecting. You're sowing seed. Cremation is pagan. It belonged to the pagan world. It's not mentioned here as a form of burial at all. And Paul uses another figure of speech over in Thessalonians. And that's a wonderful passage of Scripture. Let me read this to you. And he uses another figure of speech that's very important. He says, but I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that ye sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if ye believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. Now, they're asleep in Jesus. And you know what the picture is? The picture is a cemetery is a motel for the dead. You put your dead out there because they're going to be getting up, you see. It's just a hotel. I remember I had a funeral when I first came to Pasadena years ago of a retired preacher. He was a very godly man. I never shall forget, others went by that had loved him and they shed tears. His wife went by. She did shed a tear or two, but not many. She just reached down and she kissed him. And I heard her say, "John, I'll see you in the morning." What was she doing? She was putting him to bed. She was putting him in the motel for the dead. And listen, if you have a friend come to town and stays in a motel, you don't go out and set the motel on fire. You expect to see that friend the next day. It's your mother-in-law, you might want to, but you wouldn't set the motel on fire. You wouldn't do a thing like that. So that everything in Scripture seems to indicate that cremation is very bad testimony for a Christian. It reveals that we have very little hope, and I'd say we must have very little faith.